The crash site painted the forest floor in twisted metal and alien blood. Marcus Kane pulled himself from the wreckage of his transport, feeling the familiar burn of torn muscle and bruised bone that marked another day alive in this galaxy. The emergency beacon chirped weakly from somewhere in the debris, its signal barely strong enough to reach orbit. He wasn't supposed to be here. The cargo run to the outer colonies should have been routine: medical supplies, food synthesizers, the usual necessities that kept humanity's scattered settlements breathing. But pirates had other plans, and their plasma cannons had torn through his ship's hull like paper. Now he stood in the purple twilight of Valdris Prime, surrounded by trees that hummed with bioluminescent veins, their alien song filling the air. With notes no human throat could produce, his ship was dead, his comm system was slag. And somewhere in the distance, he could hear the hunting calls of the local predators beginning their nightly prowl. That's when he heard the whimper. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma pistol at his hip. The sound came again, soft, pained, definitely not human. He followed it through the scattered debris until he found her. She was unlike anything he'd ever seen, even after 5 years trading in the outer systems. Her skin held the pale blue luminescence of deep ocean water, marked with silver patterns that seemed to shift in the dying light. 4 arms lay twisted beneath her, clearly broken, while her lower body showed the telltale signs of spinal trauma. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, large, golden, and filled with an intelligence that burned despite her obvious agony. She spoke in rapid clicks and musical tones, her voice carrying harmonies that human vocal cords could never reproduce. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone. She was ordering him, commanding him with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. He knelt beside her, pulling out his emergency medical scanner. The readings made him wince. Multiple fractures, severe spinal compression, internal, bleeding. Without proper medical facilities, she had maybe 6 hours before her alien physiology gave out completely. The nearest human settlement was 45 miles through hostile terrain. The local wildlife included pack hunters with acidic saliva and territorial flyers that could strip flesh from bone in seconds. Going alone would be suicide. Staying would mean watching her die. Marcus looked into those golden eyes and saw something that transcended species, the stubborn refusal to surrender that he'd seen in the mirror every morning since leaving Earth. She was a fighter, just like him. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Galactic Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. He made his choice. Without a word, Marcus began fashioning a makeshift stretcher from debris and his emergency tarp. She watched him work, her musical voice growing softer, more questioning. When he finished, he carefully lifted her onto the improvised carrier, noting how her 4 arms instinctively curled inward to protect her torso. "I don't know if you can understand me," he said, adjusting the straps to distribute her weight evenly, "but we're getting out of here, both of us." She spoke again, those liquid tones carrying what sounded like protest. Marcus ignored her, shouldering the stretcher and checking his compass. 45 miles of alien wilderness stretched ahead, filled with predators that had never learned to fear humans. But humans, Marcus knew, had never learned when to quit. The first predator found them after 3 miles. The night hunter came silently. Through the phosphorescent undergrowth, its 6 legs moving in perfect synchronization as it stalked its unusual prey. Marcus had been expecting it. The scent of blood and unfamiliar pheromones would draw every predator within miles. He set the stretcher down carefully, his movements deliberate and calm. The alien princess, for that's what she had to be, given her bearing and the intricate silver jewelry that adorned her broken form, made urgent clicking sounds, clearly trying to warn him. Her golden eyes tracked the shadow moving between the trees. Marcus drew his plasma pistol and waited. The creature burst from cover in a rush of claws and teeth, its chitinous hide gleaming with bioluminescent spots that pulsed like a heartbeat. It stood 8 feet tall on its hind legs, with mandibles that could shear through starship hull plating. On any civilized world, it would have been classified as an apex predator. On Earth, it would have been called Tuesday. Marcus sidestepped the initial charge, letting the creature's momentum carry it past him before putting 3 plasma bolts into its center mass. The beast screamed, a sound like tearing metal, and spun to face him. Its alien blood hissed where it hit the forest floor, eating through the organic matter like acid. The second attack came faster, more calculated. The creature had learned, but humans had been teaching predators hard lessons for over 200,000 years. Marcus rolled under the snapping mandibles, came up, inside the creature's guard, and emptied his weapon's power cell into its skull. The beast toppled backward, its death throes shaking the nearby trees and sending smaller creatures fleeing into the night. The princess had watched it all in silence. Now she spoke, her voice carrying tones Marcus was beginning to recognize as amazement. He reloaded his weapon and checked the power level, enough for maybe 2 more encounters like that one. "Yeah, well," he said, lifting the stretcher again. "Humans are good at killing things, it's what we do." They made it another 7 miles before the fever set in. Marcus felt it creeping up his spine like liquid fire, the result of exposure to the creature's acidic blood. His emergency medical kit had basic antitoxins, but they were designed for human physiology. Against alien biochemistry, they were little more than placebos. The princess noticed his condition immediately. Her musical voice took on urgency as she gestured with one of her functional arms toward a grove of trees whose bark pulsed with soft blue light. Marcus didn't understand her words, but her intent was clear. Medicine. The trees held some kind of natural remedy. He stumbled toward the grove, his vision beginning to blur. The princess kept talking, her tone becoming more commanding, more imperious. She was giving him instructions, telling him exactly which part of the bark to harvest and how to prepare it. Marcus's hands shook as he carved strips from the indicated tree. The bark wept a golden sap that seemed to move with its own life. Following the princess's urgent directions, he chewed the bark and swallowed the bitter liquid. The effect was almost immediate. The fire in his veins cooled, his vision cleared, and strength flowed back into his limbs. Alien medicine working on human biology, it should have been impossible, but Marcus had learned not to question miracles. The princess watched him recover with something that might have been satisfaction. Then she began speaking again, her voice carrying new authority. She was giving him more instructions, pointing toward distant landmarks only she could see. For the first time, Marcus began to suspect there was more to his passenger than he'd initially realized. Her knowledge of the local ecosystem, her natural authority, the way she commanded even in her helpless state. She wasn't just nobility. She was someone who knew this world intimately. "You're from here, aren't you?" he asked, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. "This is your planet." Her golden eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something that chilled him more than any predator could. Intelligence, calculation, and underneath it all the cold certainty of someone who had never been denied anything she wanted. Marcus shouldered the stretcher and continued walking. 35 miles to go, and the night was just beginning. Dawn brought no relief. The double suns of Valdris Prime rose like angry eyes over the canopy, turning the humid air into a suffocating blanket. Marcus had been walking for 8 hours straight, his human endurance pushed beyond normal limits by necessity and stubborn pride. The princess had fallen quiet as the night wore on, though her golden eyes never stopped moving, cataloguing their surroundings with the precision of someone conducting an inventory. Occasionally she would make soft sounds, not the commanding tones from before, but something that almost resembled concern. Marcus ignored her. His focus had narrowed to the simple mechanics of survival, 1 foot in front of the other. Maintain heading 270, watch for predators, conserve water. The meditation of the long march, something humans had perfected across 1 million battlefields on 1,000 worlds. They were crossing a clearing when the ground gave way. The sinkhole opened beneath his feet like a hungry mouth, swallowing him, and his precious cargo into darkness. Marcus twisted as they fell, using his body to cushion the princess's impact as they crashed into the muddy bottom 15 feet below. Pain exploded through his shoulder as it struck stone. Above them, the hole gaped like a wound in the earth, its edges too smooth and steep to climb. The walls gleamed with moisture and something else, the telltale shimmer of predator silk. They'd fallen into a web. The spinner descended from the shadows with deliberate grace, its 8 legs moving in perfect coordination as it rappelled down its own silk. It was the size of a small shuttle, with a carapace that seemed to absorb light and eyes like black diamonds that reflected their fear back at them. Marcus reached for his plasma pistol, but his injured shoulder screamed in protest. The weapon tumbled from nerveless fingers, clattering across the cave floor. The spinner tilted its head, studying them with alien curiosity, then began to descend faster. That's when the princess began to sing. It wasn't the clicking language she'd used before, nor the commanding tones that seemed to be her natural speaking voice. This was something older, deeper, a harmonic pattern that seemed to resonate in Marcus's bones. The sound filled the cavern, echoing off the walls in complex patterns that hurt to follow. The spinner stopped, its head swiveled toward the princess, eyes focusing with laser intensity. She continued singing, her voice growing stronger despite her injuries, weaving patterns in the air that Marcus could almost see. The creature began to sway, its massive form rocking back and forth in time with her song. Slowly, impossibly, it began to climb back up its web. The princess maintained her song until the spinner disappeared into the upper darkness. Only then did she stop, her voice trailing off into silence. She looked at Marcus with exhaustion clear in her golden eyes, and for the first time since he'd found her, she seemed fragile, human. "How?" Marcus whispered. She spoke softly, her musical tones carrying what sounded like explanation. Though he couldn't understand her words, her meaning became clear as she gestured to the walls around them. The shimmer he'd taken for spider silk was something else entirely, crystalline formations that hummed with the same harmonic frequencies as her song. She wasn't just from this world. She was connected to it on a level Marcus couldn't comprehend. The planet itself responded to her voice, its indigenous life recognizing her authority in ways that transcended species. Marcus retrieved his weapon and began examining the walls. Somewhere there had to be another way out. Caves like this rarely had only one entrance. The princess watched him work, occasionally making soft sounds that he was beginning to interpret as encouragement. He found it after an hour of searching, a crack in the far wall just wide enough for a human to squeeze through. Beyond it, he could see daylight. Getting the princess through would be nearly impossible. Her forearms and broader frame made her too large for the opening. But Marcus had spent his adult life solving impossible problems with insufficient resources and excessive determination. He began to dig. The crystal formations came away in chunks under his plasma pistol's focused beam. Each piece he removed made the opening fractionally larger. The princess contributed what she could, using her one functional arm to clear debris while humming softly, not the commanding song from before, but something that sounded almost like gratitude. 3 hours later, they emerged into sunlight. 30 miles to go. The river appeared at midday like a gift from whatever gods watched over foolish humans and dying princesses. Marcus had been following the sound of running water for over an hour, his throat parched despite careful rationing of his supplies. The princess had grown increasingly pale, her luminescent skin dimming as dehydration took its toll. But rivers meant more than just water. They meant civilization. Marcus knelt at the bank and filled his canteen, then, carefully, helped the princess drink. She accepted the water with obvious gratitude, though her golden eyes remained alert and calculating. Even dying, she was studying him, evaluating something he couldn't understand. The sound of engines saved them from another night in the wilderness. 3. Hovercraft approached from downstream, their alien design immediately recognizable as Valdrian military vessels. Marcus felt relief flood through him, rescue at last. But the princess's reaction stopped him cold. She began clicking rapidly, her voice filled with urgency and what sounded distinctly like warning. When Marcus looked toward the approaching ships, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength and shook her head violently. The hovercraft landed with military precision, disgorging a dozen Valdrian soldiers in powered armor. They were of the same species as the princess, four-armed, luminescent with that same fluid grace, but their bearing was entirely different. Where she radiated authority, they projected only disciplined obedience. Their leader approached with weapons drawn, speaking in rapid musical tones. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. They were asking questions, demanding answers. The princess responded from her stretcher, her voice carrying all the imperial command Marcus had grown accustomed to. The soldiers immediately dropped to one knee, their weapons lowered in perfect synchronization. Their leader's response was filled with shock and what sounded like relief. Then the princess pointed directly at Marcus and issued what could only be a death sentence. The soldiers rose as one, weapons targeting the human who had carried their princess 43 miles through hostile wilderness. Marcus found himself staring down the barrels of energy weapons that could reduce him to component atoms in milliseconds. But he'd spent 5 years in the outer systems, learning that the galaxy was full of misunderstandings that could turn fatal in heartbeats. Instead of reaching for his own weapon, he slowly raised his hands and spoke in the calm, reasonable tone that had talked him out of a dozen similar situations. "Easy now. Let's all think about this for a minute." The soldiers didn't understand his words, but they recognized the universal gesture of surrender. Their leader barked orders, and 2 of them moved to secure Marcus, while others carefully lifted the princess from her makeshift stretcher onto a proper medical transport. As they bound his hands, Marcus watched the princess being tended by military medics. Their equipment was far beyond anything humans had developed. Devices that seemed to repair tissue at the cellular level, neural stimulators that brought feeling back to her paralyzed limbs. Within minutes, she was sitting upright, her luminescent skin brightening with returning health. She never looked at him. The flight to the city took less than an hour. Marcus spent it studying his captors and trying to piece together what had gone wrong. The princess was clearly someone of immense importance. The soldiers' reverence made that obvious. But why would rescuing her warrant execution? The answer came as they approached the Valdrian capital. The city sprawled across a series of connected islands, its crystalline spires reaching toward the double suns like frozen music. But it was the massive fortress at its heart that caught Marcus's attention, a structure that could only be a palace, its walls carved with the same silver patterns that decorated the princess's skin. She wasn't just nobility, she was royalty, and Marcus, in his ignorance, had touched her, carried her, saved her life without permission, without protocol, without the elaborate ceremonies that undoubtedly surrounded any interaction with the ruling family. The hovercraft settled onto a landing platform high in the palace's main tower. As they disembarked, Marcus got his first clear look at the princess since her recovery. She stood with fluid grace, her 4 arms moving in complex gestures as she spoke to her guards. Her luminescent skin had returned to full brilliance, the silver patterns seeming to shift and flow like living art. When she finally turned to look at him, her golden eyes held no warmth, no recognition of what they'd shared in the wilderness. She was every inch the alien monarch, beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman. She spoke a single word, musical and final. The guards raised their weapons. The execution chamber lay deep within the palace's crystalline heart, its walls humming, with harmonic frequencies that seemed designed to resonate with Valdrian physiology. Marcus felt the vibrations in his bones as they led him through corridors lined with what could only be portraits of past monarchs, their luminescent forms captured in some alien equivalent of paint that seemed to move and breathe within its frames. The princess walked ahead of them, her recovered grace making her seem to float rather than walk. She had changed into ceremonial robes that amplified her natural luminescence until she blazed like a star against the crystal walls. Whatever humanity Marcus had glimpsed in the wilderness was gone, replaced by something as remote and beautiful as a dying nebula. The chamber itself was a work of art, a perfect sphere carved from a single massive crystal, its faceted walls designed to focus and amplify sound. At its center stood a platform surrounded by raised galleries, where Valdrian nobles had gathered to witness the execution of the alien who had dared to touch their princess. Marcus was forced to kneel on the platform while the princess took her place on a throne that seemed grown rather than carved from the living crystal. Her voice, when she spoke, filled the chamber with harmonics that made the walls sing in response. He couldn't understand her words, but their meaning was clear. She was pronouncing his death sentence, listing his crimes before the assembled court. Each phrase brought murmurs of approval from the galleries, musical tones that blended into a choir of condemnation. But as she spoke, Marcus began to notice something else. Subtle variations in her tone, micro-expressions that flickered across her luminescent features before being suppressed by royal composure. She was performing, playing, a role demanded by protocol and politics, and she was struggling with it. The realization hit him like a plasma bolt to the chest. This wasn't about justice or law, it was about face. About maintaining the divine status of the royal family in the eyes of their subjects. No alien could be allowed to touch the princess and live, no matter the circumstances, even if that alien had saved her life. When she finished speaking, a guard stepped forward with an execution device, a crystalline blade that hummed with the same harmonic frequencies as the chamber walls. The weapon would use sound itself as a cutting edge, separating his molecules at the quantum level. It would be quick, clean, and absolutely final. Marcus looked up at the princess one last time and saw something that made him smile despite everything. Tears, barely visible, but there, crystal droplets that caught the chamber's light and threw it back in rainbow fragments. She was crying for him. That's when he decided to give her a gift. Instead of begging or pleading or cursing his fate, Marcus Kane did something that would be remembered in Valdrian legend for generations to come. He stood up. The simple act sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles. Guards rushed forward, but Marcus wasn't trying to escape. He was looking directly at the princess, his human voice carrying clearly in the crystalline chamber. "Your Highness," he said, using the formal tone he'd learned in his brief stint as a diplomatic courier, "I don't regret carrying you through that wilderness. I'd do it again, even knowing it would end like this. Because that's what humans do. We help people who need helping, whether they want us to or not." He paused, letting his words sink in. The chamber had fallen silent except for the harmonic resonance of the walls. "But I need you to know something. Out there, when it was just you and me and 45 miles of hostile terrain, you weren't a princess. You were just someone who needed help. And for a few hours, maybe that made us both a little more human." The execution blade rose, its harmonic edge singing with lethal frequency. But as it began to descend, the princess spoke a single word that froze the entire chamber. "Stop." The blade halted inches from Marcus's throat. In the sudden silence, the princess rose from her throne and walked toward him, her luminescent form blazing with emotions too complex for human understanding. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that made the crystal walls themselves weep with sound. The princess's words rang through the execution chamber like a song of transformation, each harmonic phrase reshaping the reality that had seemed so fixed moments before. Marcus couldn't understand the language, but he could feel the power behind it, the absolute authority of someone born to command a world. The assembled nobles erupted in shocked musical protests, their voices creating a discordant symphony of outrage. But the princess silenced them with a gesture, her forearms moving in patterns that spoke of laws older than their civilization. She was invoking something ancient, Marcus realized, some protocol or tradition that superseded the standard penalty for touching royalty. The crystalline walls responded to her words, their harmonic resonance shifting to match her tone, amplifying her voice until it filled not just the chamber, but the entire palace. When she finished speaking, the silence was absolute. One of the elder nobles, his luminescent skin marked with the silver patterns of extreme age, rose from his gallery seat. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries, but it was clear he was questioning the princess's decision. The exchange that followed was rapid, intense, conducted in harmonics that made Marcus's teeth ache. Finally, the princess turned to face him directly, When she spoke, her words were simple but carried absolute finality. Then, to Marcus's amazement, she repeated herself in accented but clear, standard galactic. "I claim the right of life debt," she said, her golden eyes meeting his. "By the laws written in crystal before my ancestors first sang to the stars, you have preserved the royal line. Your life is now bound to mine, until that debt is repaid." The implications hit Marcus like a collapsing star. Life debt was a concept that existed in various forms across dozens of species, but he'd never encountered it in practice. It meant survival, but at a cost that might prove worse than death. The elder noble spoke again, his musical tones carrying what sounded like formal acceptance. Other voices joined in, a reluctant chorus of agreement that sealed Marcus's fate with harmonic law. "Rise, Marcus Kane of Earth," the princess said, her voice carrying new harmonics he was beginning to recognize as formal address. "You are no longer condemned, but neither are you free. You will serve as my guardian until the debt between us is balanced." Marcus climbed to his feet, his mind racing. Guardian to an alien princess meant court politics, assassination attempts, and constant danger from enemies who would see him as either a threat to eliminate or a weakness to exploit. It was a reprieve, but hardly a rescue. "What exactly does this life debt involve?" he asked. The princess smiled, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the person he'd carried through the wilderness, someone capable of gratitude, even affection. But it vanished quickly, replaced by royal composure. "You will learn," she said. "Guards, escort my new guardian to appropriate quarters. See that he is provided with everything he needs." As the crystalline chamber began to empty, Marcus found himself surrounded by the same soldiers who had been prepared to execute him minutes earlier. Their attitude had shifted dramatically. Where before they'd shown contempt for an alien who dared touch their princess, now they regarded him with the wary respect due to someone under royal protection. The quarters they assigned him were palatial by human standards, a suite of rooms carved from living crystal, with walls that shifted color based on the time of day and furniture that seemed to flow from the floor itself. A wardroom contained clothing in his size, cut in Valdrian style but adapted for human anatomy. Most importantly, there was a communications console with access to the planetary information networks. Marcus spent his first night as a royal guardian, learning everything he could about Valdrian culture, politics, and the complex web of alliances that surrounded the royal family. What he discovered made his stomach clench with dread. Princess Luna was not just royalty, she was the heir apparent to the Valdrian stellar empire, a confederation of over 200 worlds that controlled a significant portion of this galactic sector. She was also, according to the intelligence reports he could access, the target of no fewer than 6 active assassination plots by various factions who opposed her eventual ascension to the throne. His rescue mission had just become infinitely more complicated. The princess had saved his life, but she'd also made him the most dangerous human in the known galaxy, the alien guardian of the most powerful woman in 200 star systems. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd carried her 45 miles to save her life, only to discover that his real job was just beginning. 3 months into his service as royal guardian, Marcus had developed a healthy appreciation for the complexity of keeping someone alive, who attracted assassination attempts like a gravity-well-attracted space debris. The palace had become his battlefield, its crystalline corridors hiding threats that ranged from poison-tipped insects to quantum bombs disguised as art pieces. He'd prevented 4 serious attempts on Princess Luna's life, each one more sophisticated than the last. The grateful looks from her loyal guards had gradually given way to professional respect, and eventually to something approaching friendship. Humans, it turned out, brought a useful paranoia to the art of protection, their evolved wariness serving well in a galaxy full of creative ways to die. But it was during the 5th attempt that Marcus finally understood what the life debt truly meant. The attack came during a state ceremony in the Great Hall, where Luna was receiving ambassadors from the Terran Federation, Marcus's own people, come to negotiate mining rights in Valdrian space. He'd been watching the crowd when his peripheral vision caught the telltale shimmer of a cloaked assassin moving through the assembled diplomats. Time slowed to a crawl as Marcus calculated angles and probabilities. The assassin was already in motion, a monofilament blade extending from concealed servos in their arm. Luna stood exposed at the center of the hall, her luminescent skin making her a perfect target. The blade would reach her in seconds. Marcus moved without thinking, his human reflexes outpacing Valdrian biology by crucial milliseconds. He intercepted the assassin's strike, the monofilament edge sliding between his ribs and finding his heart, with surgical precision. Pain exploded through his chest as his life began to leak away, but his momentum carried him forward, tackling the assassin and exposing them to the palace guards. As he collapsed on the crystalline floor, his vision darkening, Marcus felt Luna's forearms gathering him close. Her voice filled his fading awareness, speaking in harmonics that seemed to reach into his very cells and command them to hold together. "Not yet," she whispered in standard galactic, her golden eyes blazing with desperate intensity. The debt is not repaid. What happened next defied every law of biology Marcus knew. Luna's touch sent healing energy flowing through his damaged body, her royal bloodline carrying genetic modifications that could literally resurrect the recently dead. His heart pierced and still began to beat again. His torn blood vessels sealed and renewed themselves. His failing consciousness returned in a rush of impossible vitality. When he could speak again, Marcus looked up into Luna's luminescent face and saw something that changed everything. Love. Not the grateful affection of a rescued princess or the political calculation of a future empress. Real love, deep and complicated and utterly human in its irrationality. "The debt," he whispered. "There is no debt," Luna replied, her harmonics carrying tones he'd never heard before. "Vulnerability, hope, fear of rejection. There never was. I invoked ancient law to save your life because I couldn't bear to lose the first person who ever saw me as just me." Marcus struggled to sit up, his renewed body still adjusting to its resurrection. Around them, the great hall buzzed with activity as guards secured the assassin, and medics tended to minor injuries. But in their small bubble of crystal floor, the universe had narrowed to just two beings from different worlds, discovering something that transcended species. "You know this is impossible," Marcus said. "A human and a Valdrian princess. Your people will never accept it." Luna smiled. Her luminescent patterns shifting to configurations he was learning meant joy mixed with determination. "My people," she said, "are about to learn that their future empress makes her own choices. And I choose you, Marcus Kane of Earth. Not as my guardian, not as my debtor, but as my partner. If you'll have me." Marcus looked around the great hall, taking in the assembled diplomats, nobles, and guards who were all trying very hard to pretend they weren't watching the most significant political development in Valdrian history unfold. Among them, he spotted the Terran Federation ambassadors, their faces showing mixtures of shock and calculation as they realized the implications. A human mated to the Valdrian heir would reshape the political landscape of 200 worlds. Trade agreements, military alliances, territorial disputes, everything would change. The future had just pivoted on a moment of impossible biology and improbable love. "Well," Marcus said, climbing to his feet and extending his hand to help Luna. "Rise. I've carried you 45 miles through hell already. I suppose I can handle whatever comes next." As their hands touched human and Valdrian, flesh and luminescence, the crystal walls of the great hall began to sing. It was a harmonic pattern Marcus had never heard before, something the palace itself was creating in response to their union. The assembled crowd fell silent, listening to the music that would someday be remembered as the song that united two species. Marcus Kane had come to the outer systems as a cargo hauler, looking for steady work and adventure. He'd found something infinitely more valuable, proof that in a galaxy full of differences, love remained the most powerful force in the universe, even if it did require carrying paralyzed alien princesses through hostile wilderness to discover. The life debt was paid. The real adventure was just beginning.